entire career bringing you the news until she got some of her own.
My doctor took one look at the ultrasound screen and asked me, "How do you feel?" And I said, "I feel awful." And he said, "Well, that's because you didn't have a miscarriage, you have a molar pregnancy."
A rare phenomenon affecting about 1 in 1,000 pregnancies. This Las Vegas news anchor learned her worst news would get even worse.
But instead of just miscarrying that placenta that came along with the pregnancy, the body continues to grow it, and it starts to rapidly reproduce very invasive tissue. But in my case, and in some very rare cases, it continues to reproduce, and in some very, very rare cases, it can turn into a very rare form of cancer called choriocarcinoma, and then metastasize and spread to different organs in the body, and that's what happened to me.
Is that good?
Michelle turned to the place she's known best, the screen.
Worst day of my life up until this point, most definitely. It was shocking, unbelievable, so scary.
Sharing her treatments and journey on social media to show the viewer what this mother of two's worst nightmare looks like.
Well, she gotta go home with the pump. Oh, I didn't know that.
It's been amazing, Lynn. I can't even tell you how many people, hundreds and hundreds of people from all over the world have reached out to me.
Michelle's prognosis is excellent. She says she's prepared to lose her hair from the aggressive chemo that will save her life. A small price to pay to be there for her most important job, a mother, and now voice for this rare type of cancer.
And that kind of has helped me get an answer to a question that is kind of impossible to answer, but I think pretty much every person who gets a cancer diagnosis at one point asks, why me? Why did this happen to me? And it's not a great question because there is no answer. But in my case, so much good has already come out of it, because look how many people I've been able to connect, and look how we're able to put a spotlight on molar pregnancy and choriocarcinoma and make it known to the world that this is not that rare.
Her story inspiring others. I want to bring in OBGYN Dr. Suzanne Gilbert-Lentz. Doctor, thanks for being here. I mean, we know molar pregnancies are so rare.
Yes.
But how rare is it that it turns into this type of cancer?
Well, it's actually quite rare. I mean, to put it into perspective, I was thinking about this because it's very hard to find hard numbers on this cancer. Something like 13,000 women per year are going to be diagnosed with cervical cancer in this country. And you can't even find incidence numbers for choriocarcinoma, but it's something like 2 to 7 per 100,000 pregnancies. That is not to say that it's not serious and that this is not a really legitimate and great way for us to become more educated about our bodies and our health and how to diagnose and advocate for ourselves, because it sounds like that's what Michelle did here.
Yeah, and even with the molar pregnancy, which is a little bit more common, it feels like any other normal pregnancy. So how do you know if this is the best news of your life, right, or the worst news?
Yeah. Well, okay, so this is where it gets super complicated. There's molar pregnancy, and then there's gestational trophoblastic neoplasm. So not all molar pregnancies are going to end in a cancer diagnosis, but about 50% of people who have an abnormal pregnancy called a molar pregnancy, which will often look and feel like a miscarriage, will go on to have some other form of cancer diagnosis in that area. Most of them are highly treatable, nearly 100% cure rates in most of these instances. How to know if your symptoms are very, very severe, really, really, really bad nausea and vomiting, bleeding in the beginning of a pregnancy. You know, nowadays, most of us will do some kind of an ultrasound early in the pregnancy, and so it's much easier to diagnose early in pregnancy. If you've had a miscarriage, it's why it's so important to follow up with a doctor, because if we can send that tissue for pathology, we might be able to diagnose it then. We can follow you more carefully. But there are blood tests we can do, very high hormone levels that are inappropriate for where we are gestationally. These are all things that can help us make this diagnosis early and make it treatable.
And as you point out, it is very treatable, and Michelle tells me even the same thing, that it's pretty certain that she's going to come out the other end in a great spot. But what does it mean for future fertility?
Well, it depends on how advanced the disease is and where the disease is. So for local invasion only into the uterus itself, usually you don't have to do anything more than than some form of chemotherapy. And it's not always the heavy-duty IV chemotherapy that Michelle seems to be going through. But if it's invaded more widely at some point and it's recurrent, it comes back, then somebody may have to have a hysterectomy. That's a much smaller number of women who have this disease. Most women will have it treatable with chemo and with a DNC to remove the contents, and then that's it. We just follow them closely.
Yeah, Dr. Suzanne Lentz-Gilberg, and also to Michelle for sharing her story to educate women of something that many people have probably never heard of. Thank you for being with me.